1, 2. Hello, everybody. How's it going, everybody? Woo! Yeah, come on. It's the end of the day. It's the last panel. You know, we have some amazing, very, very smart, geeky people here to share all sorts of knowledge with you. And I'm Steve Giralt. I'm the founder of The Garage. We're a production company, amongst other things, in Brooklyn, not too far from here. And this panel is all about virtual production, ICVFX, in-camera visual effects, if you don't know what that means. And basically, you know, we're going beyond just using it, and the people here on how do we push it to that next level, but also make where we are today with it easier going forward. So we're going to cover a lot of it about, you know, how do we standardize things? How do we break things to make them do cooler stuff? And how do we build tools to help people that want to push the boundaries? And then the people on this stage that apply them in real life. So, there you go. These are the people that we have. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves one at a time, starting with Tommy.
Hi, I'm Tommy Mokas, and I am the resident weirdo at the garage. I, generally live in the lunatic fringe of technology and any sort of creative synergy that happens there, and basically live in an R&D perpetual loop.
Check 1, 2. Hey, how's it going? My name is Ian Fursa. I am the founder of VP Toolkit. We supply virtual production services to studios like the Garage and other studios all around the world, doing VAD work as well as technical direction and helping studios get set up, because that's something that in this industry is still very much needed. I also work as a virtual production supervisor on larger projects, commercials, and film and series work.
Hi, everybody. My name's Alexander MacLean. I'm a director, and I also work with Assimilate on LiveFX, which is a virtual production media server.
Hey, I'm Geoff Knight. I'm the CTO of Synapse Virtual Production. We have a full volume set up at LA Center Studios in Los Angeles. We also consult on integration, education, and really helping clients understand the changing landscape of ICVFX and virtual production.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. I'm very glad to have you guys all here. Thank you for coming. And just so you guys know, at the end, we'll have some time for questions. So, you know, if you have questions, make a note, and at the end, we'll let you guys ask away. We're going to leave at least like 10 minutes for it. So, we're just going to jump in. So being that, you know, Tommy works with me at the garage, and we've been honestly in virtual production for maybe a year and a half at this point. No, so we're industry experts at this point for sure. It is very new, but that being said, day one, I was like, Tommy, I only want to do this if we could do high frame rate, slow motion in virtual production. And we knew that was going to be hard. We didn't know what exactly we were getting into, but Tommy, the question's going to go to you now as far as like, what were the surprises when you went to start doing that, and what did we learn as, you know, don't go for 45 minutes, but
for sure. I would say, when Steve first came to me to, you know, go down this very, very deep rabbit hole, the first thing I started with, and is absolutely the most fundamental part of all of it, is clocking. I spent, a few months, devising, different ways of clocking and measuring latency and timing, and getting into using oscilloscopes and really fine tuning, because once you're above 60 frames a second, well, there are no standards, there are no rules, there are very few systems that will even accomplish any of these things. So I knew that going into it. What I was pleasantly surprised to find is that there are a few systems that are not only capable of doing so, but even going beyond, Assimilate LiveFX being one of the, I would say, core pieces of that. I also utilize Touch Designer, and any number of other NLEs and real-time video systems. I come from originally I come from audio. So latency, timing, all these things have been a core part of all of my, creative and technical endeavors, for my whole life. So, something that's very near and dear to me, and maybe the dorkiest thing that could ever be near and dear, but timing is very, very, very important. So the, you know, the hardest part about most of this stuff was, one, finding things that will do any of this stuff. Two, verifying that it actually is doing what it's capable of doing. And then three, testing that innumerable amount of times until you finally reach a point where you feel comfortable saying that it will do this regularly. And, you know, once we establish that sort of baseline, then it becomes more of a creative question about, okay, what can we do with this? How can we do it? What are the tools that are available? What do I need to build from scratch? And rinse and repeat. And, you know, that journey has been a lot of hours, a lot of late nights, a lot of 24-hour days, where you just bang on something until it does either the thing that it's supposed to do, or you move on to the next version of that. That is, I would say in a nutshell, what has been the process of this. And, you know, there's been, some great technology partners, and manufacturers that are very receptive to what we've been trying to do, but also, are, you know, very generous in allowing us to test these things and then take feedback from us, and, you know, have been really, really helpful in that. And I think that is maybe one of the most important parts that I found in this, is that people are happy to try to go there. I wasn't sure that would be the case.
Right. And I think that's the core of what we're going to talk about today. Was like, it's the feedback loop between the creators and the people making the stuff and the workflows, and saying that this is how the standard should be laid out, you know? So I think, you know, this is questions for kind of that side of the board here, and that, you know, what have you guys found when working with different studios and traveling to work with different productions are the biggest challenges? And, you know, how do you see us pulling out of that?
Take it. Sure.
Yeah. So, at VP Toolkit, we've been doing virtual production for 4.5 years. Woo! Which feels like a long time. I put out the first YouTube series on how to do ICVFX. Before that, it was only documentation. And only guys like this guy were able to work through that. It became a pipeline that was extremely hard to achieve by creatives. I think that is changing now. But one thing I wanted to note from Tommy's point of view and what they were just talking about is really bringing up the idea of these more advanced tools. A lot of what ICVFX virtual production and virtual production is it's a very fine skill set. So a lot of these studios that open up, they end up with a Tommy that is extremely skilled and builds internal tools and internal standards, where the rest of the studios in the world that are adopting this, and productions that have to work with these studios, they then have to start from the very beginning, or wherever, you know, Epic Games decides they're going to put in, or Assimilate is going to make it easier for people to do. But they're still starting at zero, and then based on their internal skill set are able to then build their own internal standards. I mean, I don't think there's anywhere, even when you're dealing with broadcast studios, they're all designed by somebody that knows how all the pieces work. And with current state of virtual production, we have a limited amount of people that know how it all works, and they don't work together.
Yeah. And also within, you know, to speak to the standards part of it, I mean, for us specifically, we're living completely outside of the standards, but even just simple things, like standardizing, the way that, certain data is sent, you know, between different tracking systems, or, you know, different camera systems, these sorts of, you know, generalized tools, which you absolutely have to have, don't have any one way of being done. So there are, you know, little niches where people live, and they use this system, or they use this combination of two things. And these are all acquired knowledge based on who you know and who you know is using them and who's had success with them. So there's a varied amount of different kinds of knowledge bases that are scattered throughout. And I think we're, you know, as a community starting to come together and like have these very weird conversations about very, very, very esoteric things, but are, you know, essentially coming to the same conclusions, which is that one, we need standards, that live outside of, you know, what would be a broadcast standard or a film standard, because this sort of lives with and around all of these different things. So, you know, I think that as we, you know, continue to do all this together, I think there are going to be some standards, and some are starting to arise, but we are not there yet.
Yeah. And Geoff, for you guys, right, you work within your own bubble, right? As so many of us do in virtual production now. You know, what have you found? You know, I'm sure you came in and everything was perfect from day one, but have you found that has been the most important things to standardize even amongst yourselves and how you interact with your clients?
No, you were right. Perfect. No notes. Would not change. The education is always the biggest challenge with new clients coming in. And we've hit an interesting point where now the clients know that you can do a thing. They want to do a thing, but they don't necessarily know how to achieve it. So we'll have creatives come in who have ideas that might not be achievable with the tools that we have on hand. So then we have to figure out, okay, how do we advise in a way that, like, here's how you might be able to shift your concept to get what you're wanting, or, you know, there's a budgetary dependency to do what you want to do, or, you know, how do we adapt and make it work for the creatives? Internally, we also have the conversation about standards, right? Because we do sit between live broadcast and film and video games, right? And we touch all of the things. So one of the things that we struggle with, I guess in a good way as we're growing, is finding ecosystems that work, because when we start talking about 2110, NMOS devices, things that are inherently designed to talk to each other and be deployable at a large scale with technology, they might not play with each other. And so you can have very powerful tools from different vendors that maybe don't want to play nice, which is back to standards, right? How do we get everything to talk in a way that the creatives and us as technologists empowering the creatives, how do we deploy systems that service all the needs? Which is, you know, then we go back towards 2110, IP, AV over IP, things like that. Like, that's what we're really starting to lean into with our integrations, our consulting.
You're here. I'm with it.
Yeah.
And then, we need it all to get there now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yes, but also like every day I see a certain level of studios. I know we're at NAB, so everybody's, you know, high class here, but I see a lot of smaller commercial studios and agencies that are picking this up that 2110 is not in their
it's not even in the vocabulary.
It's not, well, it's also not even, maybe even in their like just capacity at all, because of the lack of standards. Now, if they're, like I was just saying to somebody a minute ago, is, you know, if I had the plug this in here, hit that button, I'd put it on YouTube for you. But all of these different setups become so complicated and you really have to design the tool of whatever your studio is or how you're approaching a project based on that project. And it just goes back to, okay, you just need skilled, passionate people that are willing to like suffer through the pain that is trying all of the tools and then cobbling together a little, you know, tool tote to like go out and do the job.
I think it's also really important to figure out what are you trying to do for your studio and your project. I think a lot of studios that I visited have this goal of being, we can do anything. And I think the studios that are the most successful are like Steve's, where you guys are extremely focused on what you're trying to do. There's other studios are focused on car process or whatever it might be. And those are the studios that I see striving right now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because, you know, Geoff, it's whoever calls you guys up. Hey, we want LeBron James and we want, you know, whatever it is, right? And, you know, and we want that in 2 days, right? And I think, you know, we haven't made that distinction yet right now between, you know, 3-month lead times for an episodic thing or 6-month lead time versus in commercials where a lot of us work and bounce around. It's like, they don't have that lead time. You know?
Yeah. Well, when you assemble the right team, that's one of the biggest takeaways. You have to have the right people. At the risk of getting in trouble talking about lead times, right? We advise on weeks, if you have it, months of lead time, right? When we did Houdini for M&M, we turned around the entire project in about a week. Like, we got the phone call and then we were shooting like 7 days later, right? Like the timeline was that aggressive, but we had the people in place. We knew the creatives to call. And we got lucky because we'd made strategic hires and we had the right partners in house and everybody was on board with like, you know, all right, like let's buckle down, let's get it done and let's do something really cool. But in the broader sense, making sure that you have strategic partnerships at other studios, the software partners to call, you know, when a big project comes up that you can't service internally, like the answer shouldn't be, no, we can't do that. Like, you know, give me a day, let me make some calls and we have all the partnerships around the industry to make it happen.
It's M&M after all.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And how much, just curiosity, how much of that was 3D versus 2D on the wall? You know,
There were a handful of pickup location shots, but most of that was all Unreal on the wall.
Okay.
And then Metaphysic did some of the AI,
Okay.
metahuman stuff for it.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. But it was mostly Unreal. Yeah.
Steve, am I allowed to ask a question? So Geoff, yeah. Going on
No,
this,
why not?
I'm just for everybody thinking about all these things in team building specifically. Where do you find that the backgrounds of the people that are, you know, your key players, where are they coming from in different industries and what are their backgrounds?
Circus folk, mostly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I figured as much, but yeah.
No, it really is a broad range. And it's hard to pick a background. You know, our VP Soup actually comes from an animation background, but she's so well versed in the software that like, you know, she excels at what she does. You know, our systems engineer, you know, comes from a hardware background. And then our partners at Synapse all come from different, whether creative or technology or producing backgrounds. So it's hard for me to say, look to one avenue for your hiring because, you know, we got lucky in that we have such a disparate background that we can all kind of backfill each other and fill in the gaps.
Yeah. And I guess that's actually kind of why I asked, because I kind of wanted to make clear to everyone that like, there isn't a thing that you can learn that's like, oh yeah, I'm good at virtual production now. This is a culmination of literally everything that exists.
Yeah. So at VP Toolkit, we get hired for tons of different jobs. We do a lot of education with studios, but then we give them an option to be able to scale. So not everybody has the ability to have multiple operators or, you know, or be able to have the projects to run a studio and a staff that size. So what VP Toolkit usually does is if this guy has to go on vacation and they have a job,
When I'm lucky.
they're going to call me. And then so what we do is we hire a lot of contractors. So there's a lot of people out there that are super skilled the traditional way of freelancers. Some of these, you know, I've worked a couple union jobs as an Unreal operator and it wasn't even a real position yet. So there's a lot of people out there in the standard field that are learning these skills and able to get on jobs, but then it becomes really hard to wrangle that in. So if you are a company looking to like staff up for virtual production, you're really looking for that person that's willing to just solve problems and deal with the technical side of things. Now, depending upon who your client is, how fast paced you have to go, all of that is going to depend upon who you're looking for, because you may need somebody from a DP background if you're going to be dealing with a project that, you know, an animator, you know, not all animators are
DPs.
super technical, or able to do that job, but usually you're looking for somebody that understands the industry or the aspect of the industry that you need them to understand for that part, because sometimes that's harder to train than the technical. But the problem solving is the biggest thing. Is, hey, this isn't going to be easy right now, but it is going to be fun if you're willing to solve problems.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And I think that goes to film production from the beginning too, right? Like you always like, oh, let me call this line producer. They know how to get an elephant here and shut down Broadway and, whatever has to happen, right? So, having people that are, and that's where I think virtual production is today. It's, we're all from different places. We're all on the stage together because it has to be a collaborative, world right now, because we're all interested in more people understanding this tool and using this tool in some way. I mean, we're unique in that, we own it ourselves internally. We're on production company. So, for us, it's about, just using it as a tool for our clients directly, but at the end of the day, the clients want to be able to use it on other things and they want to adopt it more globally. And I think until they have good experiences and they go out and do it, and, a lot of agencies might have only done a volume shoot so far, and these are huge multinational ad agencies, right? Like it's really so early in advertising because those lead times and all the things that have to go into play, and they don't like to change the way they do things very often. But as things get tighter, people want more content in different ways. I think it's inevitable that they will want to adopt this as part of their workflow,
Yeah. And to that point, like, I think one of the key learnings of, having been doing this for a minute and speaking to a lot of people who are doing it and coming from, a live background as well as a studio background, one of the superpowers of virtual production under, the right hands is that it is a logistical Swiss Army knife. You can take a thing that would be incredibly difficult to do or incredibly expensive to do, and retool it so that now all of a sudden you have a 2-day shoot instead of a 7-day shoot that spans 3 different locations. And you've now removed a ton of travel. You've removed a ton of logistical hurdles with moving equipment, moving people, getting lodging and all of these things, and centralizing it in a place where if a team is flexible enough and the creative is flexible enough, you've now just turned that shoot into something completely simpler for everyone involved. And now you can focus more on the creative part of it. I think that's one of the highest selling points of any amount of virtual production.
When it works, it works.
When it works, it's great.
And for a food person, I don't have to shoot ice cream in the middle of the desert in Vegas and try to keep it from melting, right? Like there's certain things that it solves that nothing else could, or like, oh, I need to shoot a slow motion shot at night. Well, nighttime isn't bright enough for slow motion, but the wall, you could crank it really bright and you might be able to get away with that. So, it's a way of altering reality where the consumer doesn't realize you are at the end of the day,
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of application for the flexibility of repeatability that the technology and the deployments allow for. So we'll have clients come in who might be skeptics, or it's the ad agency who's there for the first time. On more than one occasion, we have bid out a job and they'll be like, well, we don't know if that's in our budget range. And then they go back and they do it traditional, and then they come back again right after. They're like, you know what? We changed our minds. We did that location shoot in the desert trying to keep the ice cream from melting. I changed my mind.
In the post budget, we ended up CGIing it or flaming it.
Right.
Anyway.
But with the brands that we're talking to, one of the biggest things that people are realizing is like, oh, if I'm a big box store, I can have my warehouse asset and I can reuse that every single time. If I need the slow-mo shot, right? Like I know that I can bring up that asset on your wall, get the slow-mo, or if I've got to pick up in Los Angeles, hey, you know what? Let's send the asset that we shot at the garage, send that out to Synapse. We're going to do our pickups out there, and it will look exactly the same, right?
Yeah.
That's the future I hope for, where all the walls are calibrated, and I just want to pivot for a second and talk a little bit about, image-based lighting as well, because I think that is also part of this whole grand scheme. For those that don't know, image-based lighting is basically using the volume itself, the ceiling, the walls that wrap around to actually light your scene. So, because these are 3D Unreal Engine worlds, there's a sky, there's clouds, there's everything in that, if you put them there, is in that scene. so I want to take this one to Alex because Assimilate, works a lot with image-based lighting. So tell me, Alex, a little bit about like, how do you see that getting even better as the tools get better, as the lights get better, the walls, the panels, everything?
Well, I think it's really exciting. I mean, that's what got me really excited about virtual production was the lighting. Once I saw the quality of light versus if you look at the quality of light that comes off of an LED tile versus a regular light that you can sample from your 3D environment, you don't necessarily need a massive volume. You can start to do a lot more with a smaller wall. And so I think where that's headed is just a lot more emphasis on lighting for virtual production. I think a lot of stages didn't think about lighting and still aren't thinking about it, but it's a big part of that install.
And to go back to what we were saying earlier about, the repeatability part of it, you could shoot that same scene maybe on a different volume or in the same volume, but you can recall the whole setup and be exactly where you were. You can shoot an aisle 14 of random store X and have the same exact lighting 7 months later with the same assets, with the same setup. That's the kind of thing you would, from like a music background, like, you set up the drum kit once, it'll sound that way that day. You do it again, it might get close, but this is like that world where like we are really able to do that. And so it becomes this repeatable simulated environment, but it looks real. And again, it comes back to the sort of like logistical, like Swiss Army knife, where you can now suddenly do this thing that would be logistically really difficult or nearly impossible to do without all of those elements, and the lighting portion of it really selling and wrapping the whole thing in a nice package.
Can I ask you what kind of workflows are you guys working on for correcting for the RGB aspect? How RGB is missing so there was a really good demo at Virtually Everything a couple of days ago, and it spoke to this. So on every single stage that I've worked on, we try to use.
They're not calibrating the stage?
Well, it's more than calibrating the stage.
The spectrum that's missing.
It's the spectrum missing, which then you got to correct for, but then you would actually have to correct for the background unless you're just going to mat out your person, unless you're just going to like cut them out in post. But I can let you dive into a little bit.
It just goes back to, it depends on what you're doing and what you're shooting, right? So, what's the delivery format, right? Is it Rec 709? Is it Rec 2020? What are we shooting for? Are we calibrating to the camera? Are we calibrating to the lights? Are we calibrating to the wall? It sort of depends on how you want to approach it and what your theory is behind it. I like the idea personally of calibrating to the camera and matching my wall to my sensor, my lights to my sensor. Because, for example, if you're shooting with like Cook lenses, they're warmer. It's going to look different than a Zeiss lens on the same wall, right? So, yeah, it's sort of...
Yeah, but how are you calibrating for just completely missing color spectrums?
Oh, how are you calibrating for that?
Yeah, just wonder.
Well, we're making it look as good as it possibly can.
Does it look good? Yes.
That's
shooting.
Exactly what it is.
Does it look good?
That's what every commercial I do. Is that they're like, we just fly in a wall and use that as a light, and I'm like, yeah, but
well, that's
your colorist.
Back to why the image-based lighting is important too, right? And to put your lights in the same color space as the wall and as the camera, right?
Digging into the weeds here, kids.
I mean, you'd still be missing out all the spectrum. I want to know what kind of tools you guys are using.
So this is a good touch point. I was going to say the issue of color pipeline gets muddied further as soon as you bring in an experience like DIT and DP.
Indeed.
And so we have done all manner of color pipelines. It's tough. I don't even have a default recommendation, but like a typical workflow for us looks like we will have the wall calibrated to 709 or 2020. We flipped back and forth. But no current RGB panel is going to be reproducing 2020, right? So if you want to be hitting more of your color space, 709 is certainly safer. there's a little bit of a wider gamut, even with the RGB panels on 2020. So we played, PQ, HDR, right? All of these are things that we're adjusting and playing with. The second that the DIT rolls in and they have live grade, we need to make sure that we have the conversations well in pre-production about who is handling that color pipeline. If it's us, we're happy to do that. If the DIT wants to do it, we're also happy to let that happen. But what can't happen is a double grade. So we can't be applying custom settings on the wall and the DIT has a separate LUT for the camera and they're live grading at the same time. Then it will never look like the cinematographer wants it to look. So,
that's all that matters at the end of the day.
As long as it looks good through the lens, as long as the DP and the director are happy.
Back to standards.
Yeah, right. But one more complication for image-based lighting suddenly is that our lighting console programmers are often the ones driving IBL. And so even on our stage, right, like usually it's not our VP team that is doing the image-based lighting, it is the programmer. And we've had more than one shoot where, the scene in 2001 where the apes realize that they're sentient and they're just like, that's what it looks like the first time a programmer picks up a LED processor. And so there's been no shortage of on-the-day education working with our lighting teams who are on set, who are not necessarily our staff, but our production that has come in. And that's kind of what we're here for too, right? Like, great, you guys want to drive it? We're happy to educate, happy to help. But also please, now programmer, talk to the DIT in a way that you maybe didn't have to before, because you're controlling the video that's coming through the, it's...
Right, and it's really important for them to understand what's the source material that they're sampling the lights to. Is it in the same color space? And so otherwise it's not going to match.
And how are you delivering that? Was there compression from an NDI stream that suddenly is going to make it look incorrect? Are they getting, HDMI? Do they have a capture card, right? Like we've had programmers show up that don't have a rig that can take an SDI feed in, right? So it's like, okay, now you're getting an NDI stream and now it's compressed and now you're going to lose something.
Are you guys using mostly Grand MA, like for your actual consoles?
We have an MA in-house, but it's whatever the programmer wants to use. We don't dictate who's...
Sure, yeah. No, I was just curious what you guys had in-house.
All right, we got to keep moving. We're running out of time. It's amazing. Oh my gosh. All right, so I want to play one video that we have here because it's once again, it's not Oscar winning, but maybe soon. But it's really about showing some of the future possibilities that we've been playing with. So there's what's called ghost frame, phantom track, frame remapping. The idea is all the same. It's basically the LED wall allows you to switch what is being displayed on the wall per frame. So I could actually alternate between the Unreal world and green screen or blue screen, or between the Unreal world and another Unreal world. Or it also allows multiple cameras with multiple angles to all have their own frustum. But on top of that, we're also playing with frame syncing the lights as themselves. So this is using frame source lights that actually could take in the pulse, the clock, and then we could actually have each scene have its own lighting scenario happening simultaneously. So, let's see if it actually plays. There we go. So, and this is the wipe is just showing you this is one take. Like you can't match cut a liquid like to be exactly the same. So what is actually going on here is there's two different lighting scenarios happening simultaneously, and you could cut this however you want. Like you could, cut one side to the other. You could match cut between any point in time in this whole thing. And if you're a brand and you need to shoot this in different languages and different scenarios with different background talent or anything like that, it really starts getting really interesting. This is just a test is like, can we do this? And what are the possibilities? And, with somebody like Pepsi, right? Or Anheuser-Busch or any brand that it's all liquid, you're not going to shoot green screen. What happens to the liquid through the glass, through the ice, through all that stuff. I'm going to play it one more time for you so we could do that. But I just want to touch on the idea from the panel here, have you guys been using Ghost Frame yet? And if you have, has it been helpful? If you haven't, should we?
I can speak to that. So Yes. So I worked with Lux Machina, and who's a integrator and service provider in this space, big one, and it was for this year's Super Bowl, and we did dual 60 frames per second broadcast cameras with Ghost Frame. So we were able to get two completely different camera angles for the cutscenes for this year's Super Bowl. So whenever it shows the person, stepping back and being like, okay, this guy, and then he does his move or says something, that was all filmed twice. So if you look at the screen, you just saw like madness because it's two completely different perspectives of a virtual world at once. So really, like, the technical side of that is offsetting your sync, offsetting your gen lock, and then having basically duplicating your system in most cases with Simply 2010. That's going away, but for the standard ways that people are still doing it without that, you basically have to have two systems running at the same time for each input, and then an LED wall processor that can handle it. And the frames, the refresh of the panel, which this guy, I remember when you actually called me well before you bought your panels and started and was like, I'm just doing high speed.
Yeah, that's all I wanted.
Yeah. We go back and forth depending on the scale of the project, right? Like our base configuration, because of the size and the scale, right? Because there are budget implications to how you lay out your processing, how high your frame rate can go, things like that. So our base frame rate is up to 60, right? Or 30 with frame remapping on Brompton. We had in that configuration, we had a client on the day come in and they were not happy with the plates that the VFX team delivered to play in the background. So without being prepared for it, they said, oh, by the way, can we do the thing? And it's, it's like, oh, and we got through it. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, you would like a blue screen plate in the background while we're playing video. And we're like, well, we're not configured for that for this show. So no. And they didn't like that answer. So we auditioned it for them, and interlacing the two fields when it's not set up properly on the network side, everybody in the room knew, and they knew very quickly that it was not going to be a pleasant experience. And then that was enough that they went, okay, never mind. We won't do that. But there are, beyond the scope of what we have time to talk about now, right? There's some very real implications to making this work and making it work well. So,
this is amazing.
You guys,
this is wild.
And this is dual 60. So there's 120 frames on the Red Raptor XLX. And that's the other challenge too. You'll run into a DP that, I only shoot Alexa 35 or I only shoot Sony. It's like, well, broadcast cameras or the Red XLX or just the X are the only ones that do this in a nice way. Like you could do it in post and it's a whole hot mess, but that is a limitation, and I don't see all the cameras jumping on board, but I think it's going to be interesting going forward.
I'll be asking for them to as often as possible.
Yeah, we're already asking for 4. I'm like, 2 is not enough. Give me
Need more.
4. Yeah. Cause I'm like, I have 240 frames to play with. Like, I could do 4 60s. It'll be great. So that brings us to questions. Anybody? All right. I think there's a microphone that's going to come around. Oh boy, all sorts of questions.
What did you guys say? Why are there so many questions?
I know.
What did we not say?
What did we not cover in full detail? Let's see. Here it comes. There you go.
Yeah. Thanks again for all the deep, deep dive here.
Oh yeah, we haven't gotten anywhere yet.
I guess the question I had is, so you've got the two ends of the spectrum. Producers are trying to get production out. Techs and creatives are trying to actually craft and get tight of the LED wall with bringing down their neck and just try to learn how to do this thing. What would you say about ROI or even the financial prudence of giving crafting into the production flow time for the techs and creatives to actually practice stuff they've never done before so that they can push the limits?
Interesting. That'd be for you, Geoff, I think.
Yeah. So we try to host master classes as frequently as we can. We'll do it at other stages. We'll do it at our stage. That's a more formal introduction. But for us, it's mostly about having a spirit of openness and like trying to get as many people educated as possible. Unfortunately still most of the education happens about 10 minutes after call time. Just by the nature of how productions roll. But I think as an industry as a whole, not gatekeeping, sharing the knowledge, like that's kind of what we're here for. Similar sentiments around the panel here, but just getting people as up to speed as we can when we can.
And is there such thing as a virtual production shoot without a pre-light day?
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh, wow.
Right.
I would also want to add that I think it's up to the team to not make it uncomfortable for production, because, we're on the technical side all the time. So, and I've heard it referred to as a fight, a battle, and it becomes tough because you want to say, we got to educate them. But sometimes you have to go, no, we just have to remove the technical from what they see and properly communicate the limitations. If they want to know why, you can tell them, but you got to warn them that you're going to be sitting here and it's probably going to, we're going to have to explain 50 things, but it's really removing that technical side and making production feel like normal production for productions. You don't want them to be bogged down by the technical, because the education comes, but only for the people that should have the education. Broad production should not have to learn all of the aspects of these studios to be able to work with these companies.
But the first AD does need to know suddenly what Genlock is, because we have to do a Genlock test, right? So it's
well, that's just he doesn't have to know what Genlock is. He needs to know that you're going to need time in the morning. And that's the only thing that I think you have to communicate is, listen, if you want this to work correctly, here's how much time we need. Here's how much time we need here. And even in selling bids and budgets, you can try. I know it's tough, but you can try and put in, I know people that use discovery fees and things like that, where they're like, hey, we're pretty sure we can do this, but we need like 2 days to just focus with half our crew to make sure that this works before we get everybody else in here. And then when you're rolling on the day, you have a proof of concept. If these guys had to do this again, but it just wasn't this concept, it was another concept, they've done it, but they put in that time to make sure that they could do it.
Yeah. So much time. But here, let's keep going with questions.
Hello. Thank you so much. My question would be, what an amazing aspiring photographer would have to know absolutely about the virtual production? Because could you summarize, because I did hear about 2 different cameras that work with virtual production, but could you please summarize what's like the most important aspect?
I can do this if you want.
DPs you want to see when they come work with you? Thank you.
Want me to do this?
Yeah.
I could take that. Okay, so if I'm going to talk in the terms of ICVFX, are you talking about an LED wall stage, ma'am? Or just virtual production in general? So there's a couple different types of virtual production. There's green screen, there's AR comp, where you're just looking at a 3D thing in a regular space. And then generally all of us, Assimilate goes across the board, and I know you do many different projects, but we focus on ICVFX, which is using an LED wall. The main things for a cinematographer to take into consideration is camera choice, which camera choice is mostly you just need Genlock. The way that these things talk to each other and you don't see errors on the wall, like when you use your phone to film a screen and you see weird stuff on it, it uses a synchronization called Genlock. So the camera has to have that. So your Alexa Mini doesn't have Genlock. Your Alexa Mini LF, that's got Genlock, and pretty much every other line, a lot of the Sonys, you just look for that. And then as far as shooting on a wall, you have to take into consideration that to be able to get the background to look correct, it can't have light spilling on it. You have to have contrast ratios. So when you're on an LED wall as a DP, I always joke around and say that, on every single job, all I do is just yell at the DP to stop spilling light on the wall, because it completely destroys your ability to have a final pixel image that you can walk away from. So that's using light grids, that's using flags. And then the basic understandings of what you're looking at on the wall or in the room is not important. What's most important is what you see through so you make all of your decisions through through your monitor. And you make sure you're looking at a calibrated monitor, because that's a whole nother thing. But a lot of lighting decisions and color decisions can accidentally be made by eye, where you're like, why is that orangey, bright yellow, green? But then when you look at it at the monitor, oh, look, it matches the tungsten light. So there's a lot of that when it comes to a virtual production stage. And then mostly the other thing is just patience with the crew, especially when it comes to the communication of whoever's doing the in-level lighting. Because as a DP, you have to work with the team that's doing the in-level lighting to make sure that your eye and your professional, all the talent that you've got all over these years is used in that world as well. Because you might not get what you want if you just let them do their thing.
That's good. DPs are known for their patience.
Yeah. And love to hear when you say, no, you can't do that. All right. Other questions? Yeah.
First and foremost, thank you to everybody here. That was clear to see what you guys are talking about. I learned that you guys all have this written to you, and that is written thing I can go with it. So my questions kind of piggybacked off of everybody else's question, and my question is regarding what are the resources for people who want to educate their home, and which are filter or beginner training again. And where can they find education resources to really start getting into it? Because you mentioned how the influence data, nobody knows what's going on. So I'm like, okay, is there a resource like one get that handed, right?
Yeah. I'll start by saying there's a lot you could do with an iPhone as a tracker, a green screen and a camera and Unreal that you download for free, as far as like if you have the willingness to dive into that. But then I know these guys will speak more, especially Ian, Mr. YouTube, and everybody else. Yeah, give your suggestions.
Go. So yeah, education on this stuff is tough, especially because you have to kind of decide what you want to do. Like there's so many different avenues to virtual production. So I usually tell people decide what you're going to do and then figure out what the path is to that. Now there's programs like CG Pro that offer general virtual production, and 3D courses. These guys have an in-house course. It's fully extensive. I don't want to call it serious. That might not be the right word, but it's pretty serious. You're going to learn a lot from something like that. But my usual recommendation is to create something on your own. Like, our company, VP Toolkit, just is continuing to release. We actually have to release one tomorrow morning. A series of how to do in-camera VFX with a laptop and a projector. So it's for indie filmmakers, content creators, and anybody that wants to learn the general fundamentals of this. Now, it's not going to be a fully professional setup. It's not going to be an LED wall, but will you be able to create amazing content on it and learn the fundamentals of what this is with something like that? Definitely. But you have to decide what you want to do first and then build that roadmap there, because you can just learn this stuff forever.
I'll play devil's advocate and say none of that matters and you should just fool around with everything. And I say that half in jest, but really, truly, there are no rules to any of this yet. There are standards, there are practices that are being developed every day, every hour by people who are trying to do this all the time. You might try something that no one has ever tried before, and you might discover that through fooling around. And I think there's a huge amount of different kinds of tools that exist. Any one of these tools could be your gateway into some of the other ways to use this stuff. And, like I come from a lot of these other experimental worlds, but I also come from running live shows and broadcasts and these sorts of things. So somewhere in the middle there is where I found the synergy to make all of these things go the way that we're able to use in a production situation. But most of it was discovered by being a weirdo and pushing things and just experimenting all the time and not sleeping a lot, unfortunately. But that this is one of those. This is a very punk rock world as far as living in a, you know, very broadcast and production environment. It's still really new. So, you know, as much as there are rules and there are things that we want to standardize, have fun with it and, you know, let your curiosity drive some of what you want to get into and discover it that way. There are some resources that are out there that are super helpful, but I think experimentation is absolutely the most important part.
Start with the fundamentals.
Yes. Learn science, kids.
But I think
Be a filmmaker first and then virtual production filmmaker.
If you want to be a filmmaker.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I think something I just want to add to that is go shoot something in the real world first. And then, you know, get a TV like this, shoot a plate, go outside, shoot a real scene, shoot a background, put it on a TV and see if you can match it. Can you make it look real? And start there and don't worry about the tools or the cameras or whatever. The whole goal is to look through the camera on set, like Ian mentioned. Does it look real? That's where I always start with my projects.
I'm going to give the nerdy analytical answer and say, read the documentation.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of doc.
I think joining trade organizations are worth their weight in gold, right? Like join SMPTE, join ACM, the VFX, right? Anything that you can join that is publishing documentation on the back end, like will inform the why a lot of these tools work in the background. I think, you know, experimenting is invaluable for the what's and the why, but then for the how of it, right? To really dig under the hood, you know, the trade organizations really
Yes.
are.
Read white papers. They're really, really useful. They're not fun.
Just go make something.
Great.
And on white papers, unfortunately, we are over our time already. So, I want to say thank you to all the panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys all for being here and come up and, you know, ask us questions if you want. All right. And then enjoy New York City.
Thanks, everyone.